We went with, one of the big providers, did their managed vulnerability disclosure program. And for those who've never done it before, this isn't just, hey, you sign and all of a sudden people are reporting to you. Probably a couple months, I think, in most cases, in some cases even longer, is creating your policy and defining your scope. This is the rules that you want the hackers to follow, telling them, which sites are the ones they should hack? What are the limitations on the types of attacks you want to go? How far do you want them to go? If they find an attack that actually lets them, for example, say an unlimited SQL injection attack. This is where you set the rules to say, okay, do not drop tables, do not download the entire database. Download a few records enough to prove your concept, to prove that it works, but do not suck down my entire database of names, addresses, and social security numbers, please. If you have internet exposed non-prod instances of your applications, do you want them to use those instead of the production versions? Which of your applications? You may not want some of your applications to be in scope for your bug bounty program. For whatever reason, whether that's on a permanent basis or whether that's on a cyclical rotating basis, maybe during peak business season, you just don't want that going on. You don't want the risk of a hacker accidentally breaking your app, during that particular important time of year, time of month, time of quarter, whatever. All those rules you can define in your policy and your scope, and that does take time.
Hello and welcome to Secrets of AppSec Champions. My name is Chris Lindsay, and today we're going to be speaking with Michael Vance. Today's conversation is going to be around penetration testing and bounty programs. Michael is the CISO at Navient. Michael, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, so I've been CISO at Navient for almost 2 years now. Prior to that, I was in charge mainly of building security and things. So had responsibility for security architecture and application security. Pretty small team, but we managed to get some things done.
Today's conversation is going to be around external services and combining both bounty programs as well as pen testing together to be able to take your program to the next level.
Yeah, and I think that was actually, as I mentioned, we've always had a small team. So it was especially important for us to get outside help. I always envy these when I hear some of my peers talking about having, a red team of 10, that they can just throw at whatever they want, and really strong in-house hacking resources. We haven't had that. So there's always been some struggles to get good talent. Of course, I think everybody does that. But, it says that budgets are tight. Everybody talks about how they don't have enough AppSec talent. That's a subject we could do off on a whole nother podcast if we want to. But yeah, the way we've addressed that is by getting outside talent to do it for hire. And that's mainly taken two forms. We've had, for a number of years, in a couple of different flavors, a contract engagement with a well-known application security firm, who for the moment shall remain nameless, we'll see, to do, however do you want to call them, ethical hacks or application pen testing, an applications-focused test, a particular application to hack into it and find the things that are wrong. A combination of automated with manual follow-up dynamic testing. We also had an interesting evolution as well with our bug bounty program that I think is actually a pretty good story, and I hope one that not very many others have. That on how you get to a full-fledged bug bounty program.
Well, and the value that bug bounty programs bring to you, the benefits are numerous, because really when you start thinking about what a bug bounty program does for you, it gives you the ability to legally tell the world, okay, I'm going to set up this environment, come attack it, see what you can do and help us to be better. Because when you start actually doing something like a bug bounty program, really that shows the world you're trying to be better stewards of the data and with your applications. But it also gives you the chance to say, look, we feel like we've done our best effort. We can only go so far internally. We can only go so far externally. Let's see what people can do, because you have these 12-year-olds and 14-year-old kids, or even professionals who do this just kind of on the side for fun to see what they can do.
There's always some fear of, are we sharing too much? Are some of these people gray hats? Or some of them just flat out black hats in disguise? And I think, there's always a risk of that, but that's why you don't run your own bug bounty program entirely. That's why you hire somebody, like BugCrowd or HackerOne, or is there anybody else, or are those pretty much the only two in the space? They're certainly the big two.
Yeah, those are the big two. I mean, there's a few other ones, but those are your two
Yeah.
biggest ones.
Yeah, but that's why you hire them to run the program, and to manage the people, to vet the people, to give them the right incentives, to follow the rules. And like I said, the story of how we got to both, they're almost a little connected. So for many years, we were working with an AppSec specialty firm to do ethical hacks on our applications, and we were doing that where we paid for a certain number of attacks, a certain number of hacks, and we only got so many. They cost so many per. And of course, it's one of those things where sure, the more you buy, the cheaper the rate gets, cheaper the unit cost gets, but it was fairly expensive, on a per hack basis. Part of the reason we used that model was because with them, that was the only model they had where we could guarantee U.S. citizen and domestically sourced resources for all the hacks. So we took this contract and we converted it to another service offered by the same AppSec consultancy, where rather than having a certain number of tests, to do just like, hey, you bought 12 tests for the year, 15 tests for the year, you bought one testing stream, or you could buy as many testing streams as you wanted, but we bought one. And basically the way that one worked was just keep the tests coming, keep them in the queue. And the deal is that with having one stream, they would always test up to one thing at a time. We couldn't have them test two things at once. We could only have them test one thing at once, but we could keep it going constantly. And as long as we could keep the stream filled, we actually tripled our testing capacity the first year we did it. We tested 3 times as many applications, and kept the stream about 92% filled that first year.
I can see that because, I mean, the nice thing about having the stream is as you're deploying new or having new features come out, you could be verifying and validating those as they come out. So now it's not just, okay, we have 3 or 5 or 10 specific tests that we've paid for. Now you can sit there and you can move things around in the queue and get things tested quicker and more flexible.
Right.
I like that idea.
But instead of, so it's not that they're looking at everything all the time. They're still looking at one application at a time. But like I said, as soon as they finish that one, they just start up on the next one that we've got, prepped and queued up. Instead of having just that limit on a certain number, and if, if you think about it, even if, with their most intensive testing protocol, an application pen test would be about 2 weeks. You do, new application every 2 weeks for a full year. That's 26 applications, whereas before we were only buying 12 for virtually the same amount of money. And the main difference is that I think this is our 4th year, if I remember correctly, with the streaming testing service, and we've pretty much maintained that pace of about 90%, capacity on the stream, and have been able to do a lot more testing. We need to convince more developers to come over to the dark side, but that was always my pitch whenever I was trying to hire anybody. I know we're just digressing. When I was ever, trying to hire new AppSec talent, was I pitched it as trying to get developers who were tired of just coding day to day and wanted to get into security. So I think that as a general rule makes for better AppSec people than folks who came up through the more traditional network security. How did that segue into the bug bounty program? We started off slow. We did a what they call a managed vulnerability disclosure program, which is basically, we're not offering bounties. We're not going to give you cash, but we're going to set up an easy communication mechanism for people to report issues they find, and we're going to do it on a platform that has a pool of hackers available, that can still give them some incentive. Because if you're a hacker on their programs, and you discover something valid and report it, you still get reputation points.
Right.
Which is the non-cash incentive of bug bounty programs. It's the dopamine shot of finding something and reporting it. There are some experienced hackers that still like to do that sort of thing just to kind of give back. It's also one of the ways that that new hackers on those platforms can establish themselves, get some reputation points, which lets them then get invited to some of the actual cash-paying bounty programs.
And you got to start somewhere. And the nice thing about it is when you have somebody that's wanting to get into hacking, this is a great avenue for them to, have a chance to legally do this without getting in trouble.
Right.
You've set the boundaries, you have a nice program, and what you're talking about is spot on perfect, because really creating that channel initially of, hey, we have a finding, how do I get it to you? Because in the past, a lot of companies would get upset if you come to them and say, look, I have a find. And their first thing is, wait, what do we do with this? And wait, why are you hacking us?
How many of us actually have the technically required, but email address of security at domain name going someplace where it's actually monitored all the time?
Not many.
That was in theory is supposed to be the way that we were supposed to find out about problems that other users found with our internet presence, right? That theory hasn't scaled well. I think those email addresses
really.
definitely get more spam than they do anything else. So we went with one of the big providers, did their managed vulnerability disclosure program. And for those who've never done it before, really, this isn't just, hey, you sign and all of a sudden people are reporting to you. The first, quite honestly, probably a couple months, I think, in most cases, in some cases even longer, is creating your policy and defining your scope. This is the rules that you want the hackers to follow. Telling them, which sites are the ones they should hack. What are the limitations on the types of attacks you want to go? How far do you want them to go? If they find an attack that actually lets them, lets them, for example, say an unlimited SQL injection attack. Okay. This is where you set the rules to say, okay, do not drop tables, do not download the entire database.
Right.
Download enough, download, a few records, enough to prove your concept, to prove that it works. But do not suck down my entire database of names, addresses, and social security numbers, please. Things like that. If you want them to use, if you have internet exposed non-prod instances of your applications, do you want them to use those instead of the production versions? And which of your applications, you may not want some of your applications to be in scope for your bug bounty program for whatever reason, whether that's on a permanent basis or whether that's on a cyclical rotating basis. Maybe during some peak business season, you just don't want that going on. You don't want the risk, of a hacker accidentally breaking your app during that particular important time of year, time of month, time of quarter, whatever. All those rules you can define in your policy, in your scope. And that does take time. So, when you sign the contract, it's going to be 2-3 months with you, working with your account team at the platform company and getting that up, getting it published. Then they've got to go and they've got to invite people. A vulnerability disclosure program will initially start private. So meaning that it won't be there for anyone on the platform to see. They'll invite hackers according to a certain profile. They may do a certain percentage of, newbies. They may have a few experienced hackers who have said, yes, I will participate in new VDPs in order to help get the program running. And so they try to get a cross section and get those invited. And then you just sit back and wait. Especially and especially when you're just doing a VDP where you're not paying, because one of the things you don't need to worry about at that point is, what are your bounty levels and do you have the account funded properly and all of those things. And then really the next question on a managed vulnerability disclosure program is, when do I take it public? And there's two ways to take it public. One is kind of a semi-public. And that is that, and you can choose to do that. You can choose to do this with the initial rollout, but most don't. Is you actually put a page on your public website that allows people to report a bug through your website. And really, all that is either a frame or some other convergence over to the platform. But from the browser standpoint, it's on your website, and you make it easy to find from your homepage. Generally, we all have a security and privacy section somewhere, so you click that, and there's a report a bug, and then you get the page that lets people do that. What that'll do is, if somebody who isn't already a member, isn't already a participant in the platform, that will let them report something, and if they're not a member, it'll give them the option of joining. So it's a little bit of a recruiting tool also for the platform management companies, but it's a way of getting that public in the sense that it's on your website for where everybody can see it. And then the next phase is actually going public within the platform, and that goes from that invited pool of hackers to now saying, hey, we've got this new disclosure program that is open to anyone on the platform. And there's a place where hackers can go and they can say, hey, let me look for people who aren't paying but who still have platforms, and they'll get the list of companies, and they might get prioritized by stack expertise or whatever algorithms the platform is using to get those in front of people, and then they'll go. So we had that. We had just gone public, so we'd gone through developing our policy. We had been private for about 8 months or so, 7-8 months, and we had just taken the VDP public when budget for it got cut. So here we've got the program for a year. We were having some success. We were moving forward, and decision was made. We just weren't getting the juice out of it. So gonna let it go. Very reluctantly, cut the program.
Now, my question to you, which I know a lot of people are thinking, which one did you get the better results? Now, when you look at the findings and from the criticality, the findings from when you look at the bounty program versus, a paid penetration testing company, which one gave you the best juice, for the squeeze?
At this point in the story, with just doing the VDP without paying bounties, it was still the managed testing service, the managed pen test. And sometimes it's hard to tell, when you're doing the same sort of tests repeatedly, year after year, using the same company, even if it is individual, even if the individuals doing the hacking are different, but using the same company, you're doing that because you've got compliance reasons. Anybody familiar with PCI knows you've got to do your annual ethical hacks. When you're doing those and you start seeing a drop off in results, you've got to take a real hard look and ask, okay, is this for a good reason? That is that my developers are doing things better now. They've learned from the last 2 years of findings, right. 2 or 3 or however many years of findings for as long as we've been doing this, that they're actually getting better and they're not creating as many new bugs or as many new critical bugs. Or is this, a little bit of, we've kind of reached a plateau with this vendor and their testing methodology, and we're just not going to get, anything new.
Hey guys, as you can see, Mike is in a different spot. We ran into a technical difficulty while we were recording, but we have now since resolved that, and we're able to keep going.
If you start seeing findings go down, either in quantity or quality, looking for the root causes of that. Are your developers just getting better, or is the testing firm a little stagnant? And that's when it's a good idea. If you haven't done it by then, that's when it's a good idea to introduce the bug bounty program. And I think that I'd gotten to the point where we'd gone through, we'd done our vulnerability disclosure program, and then it got canceled because of budget. As luck, maybe we'll see, would have it, a couple months later, we got kind of a strange email from, it was me and our director of vulnerability management. Got an email out of the blue from a guy who said, hey, I just found a bug in one of your internet facing apps, and I was able to download a whole bunch of information on people with their names, address, social security numbers. I found out about you guys because I'm currently working for your former director of network security. My regular job is working for him, but I also do some white hat hacking on the side. And so, he eventually explained, when we did get in touch with him, that he'd found us because there are a couple of websites unaffiliated with the bug bounty program management companies that will still kind of aggregate and publish company names of companies that they think have bug bounty programs. So he'd found us through there. When we had our managed VDP, we'd gotten onto this one site's list, and he'd started looking at a couple of our apps. He found something, but then he couldn't actually find any way to report it because, of course, our program had been discontinued, and we didn't have anything on our public web page anymore to show it. So he actually did. I mean, he was in this sense, he was a really good white hat hacker. He's like, okay, do I have any connections at all with this company? So he discovered from LinkedIn that his just so happened by total coincidence that his then current boss was a former employee of ours. He contacted him, and through him got a couple of our email addresses and was able to get our attention then with an email. Turns out the problem that he found was very real. Took a little bit to fix. We actually had to take the app down for about a week. This was a B2B app, but so it didn't completely and it didn't completely cripple that line of business, thankfully. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have been able to take it down. But we were able to do that while we got while we got it fixed. And that between that and the fact that we had in that intervening time, we had a change in senior management. We got a new CIO. Between this happening and the new CIO, there was now renewed interest in a bug bounty program because it's like,
I
hey,
wonder why. I wonder
yeah,
why.
what do we do if this happens again?
Right.
Or why was it so hard for this guy to tell us about this? And so we were able to revive the bounty program this time with backing for going full bounty, not just VDP. So and with that, we've had some good success. That's another thing that I think it is a lot of value with using one of the bug bounty platforms and being able to specify what you want. Is that applications that may be hard to find to the general public, you can put them out there and say, "Here, come at this." And so we were able to find we got quite a bit of activity within those. We had another ramp up period. We had to go back and revive our scope. Thankfully, the platform provider that we were working with, they don't actually, unless you explicitly tell them to, they don't actually delete your entire, irrevocably your program until after I think it's like 2 or 3 years. We'd only had a 1 year lapse, and or actually not even quite a year. I'm trying to remember how long it ended up being. I don't remember off the top of my head, but but bottom line, they were able to simply revive the corpse, um, and and so we were able to get a little of a head start. We were up and running with the bounty program then in about a month and a half, because our scope was still pretty much intact. We just had to define what our bounty levels were, get the bounty pool, get some money transferred into the bounty pool, which is basically an escrow account, and then start, once again, sit back and wait for the reports to come in. um, and they came fairly quickly, and they came on some applications that we hadn't necessarily expected, because and they found some very different things. One of the things that has always been one of the big differences in approach to application security testing. I always kind of liked the terminology on this, the difference between bugs and flaws.
Mm-hmm.
Bug being the simple bit of code that's wrong that that allows somebody to do if you're just doing concatenated strings to do your SQL queries, versus doing parameterized queries. That's a bug. But flaws get into things like things like design, things like business logic errors, and other things that you really need to kind of use the application to do. Now, a dynamic tester should be doing both, but depending on who's doing the testing, what methodology they're using, one or the other may be emphasized more. And a lot of the time, some of the simple testing that a scanner can do, testing for SQL injection or cross-site scripting or cookies that aren't encrypted and things like that are going to be the first thing that somebody goes to. Whereas I think with the bug bounty crowd, they're not doing much of that. They're assuming that if you've got a bug bounty program, that you've probably done most of the basic hygiene. They'll still throw something out there if they find it. Don't get me wrong, because anything for another couple $100.
What is the best security advice you've ever been given?
Best actual security advice, or the best advice as a security practitioner? Because those are two different things.
Either way, the best advice. I always ask.
I mean, let me just touch on that. I mean, no, those really are two different things, because if you're talking about the best security advice, best advice to secure things, I don't even know where I'd start, because the answer to that is going to vary depending on what the problem is, what the situation is, what
Right.
you're being asked to secure. That kind of leads into the best advice as a security practitioner, and that's that always ask the questions to make sure that you completely understand the problem you're being asked to solve. Because non-security folks are not always good at defining exactly what the security problem is, or the right security problem. So making sure you fully understand the issue, and that means not just asking the technical questions. That means understanding the business behind it too. The part of the CIA triad that everybody always forgets about is availability. So
Yeah. Well, everybody learned with CrowdStrike the
right.
availability.
So you may come up with a great solution, but if that great solution involves having to take down a core business app for some sort of testing at 5 o'clock, and the business actually runs until 8 o'clock. Well, and that's an oversimple example of the things that can go wrong. But I think that's probably it. Is don't be afraid to ask questions.
That's great advice, Mike. I appreciate your time for coming on today, and thank you so much for being here.
All right, thanks for having me, Chris.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today on Secrets of AppSec Champions. If you found today's information valuable, hit that subscribe button on your Apple Podcast, your Spotify, or wherever you're listening to today's episode. Ratings and reviews are like gold for us, so if you're feeling generous, please leave us a kind word, as it helps others find our show. Until next time, take care.